You're listening to Skeptoid. I'm Brian Dunning from Skeptoid.com. Facts and Fiction of Polynesian Navigation, Part 2. This episode was sponsored by Frederic Rania, Skeptoid's Earl of Elixirs. To personally sponsor your own episode, come to Skeptoid.com/sponsor. Welcome to the show that separates fact from fiction, science from pseudoscience, real history from fake history, and helps us all make better life decisions by knowing what's real and what's not. For 4,000 years, the people who were to become the Polynesians gradually migrated eastward across the Pacific Ocean from the region around Taiwan. Eventually, they reached what is today French Polynesia, and from there they spread outward toward the three corners of the Polynesian Triangle: Hawaii, New Zealand, and Rapa Nui. One of the greatest and most difficult migrations in human history had been successfully completed, and in doing so, they developed wayfinding, traditional Polynesian navigating. It was a skill that easily rivaled any other ever created, and today we're going to find out how it worked. Last week in Part 1, we talked about the history of this skill and how it had almost become completely lost by the middle of the 20th century, and also dispensed with a few popular myths and misconceptions about it. Today we're going to give an overview of what these navigators actually had to learn, and actually did. Voyaging was typically done in their larger boats called voyaging canoes. These were typically large twin-hulled catamarans, or single-hulled canoes with outriggers. Several types of sails were used. Navigating with no instruments of any kind was accomplished with surprising accuracy, and since so much went into it, we're not going to waste any time, but jump right in. We'll start with what was, by far, the most important skill: celestial navigation. By far the most important wayfinding technique was celestial navigation, just as it would be today for us if we lost our modern electronics. They did not, of course, have compasses. In fact, they had no knowledge that such a thing as magnetic north existed. However, the system they developed was basically just as good. It was called the star compass. The Polynesian star compass had 32 houses, comparable to our 360 degrees. They had a north, south, east, and west, each with 7 points in between, giving 8 steps from one cardinal direction to the next, just as we might say northeast, which divides into north-northeast, which divides into north-north-northeast, as the first step clockwise from north. Each house had a name. Polynesian master navigators memorized a staggering 220-plus stars, and for each, which house it would rise and set in, and even understood how to adapt these positions based on the season. So with a glance at which stars were near the horizon, they knew exactly which direction they were headed. That in itself is an astonishing accomplishment of memory, and even more impressive is the generational learning it was built upon. The star compass also incorporated the moon and the planets. They understood the difference between the planets and the stars, even if they didn't know what they actually are, which didn't matter. The differences in their movements and cycles was helpful, and their greater brightness, plus that of the moon, helped when sky conditions made the other stars hard to see. In daytime, the houses in which the sun rose and set gave them their heading. They had no clock, so they measured the time of day by the sun's height above the horizon, calibrated by season. They might use their hand, a stick, or anything, each according to individual preference, to know how far along they were between noon and sunset or sunrise. The sun's reflection on the ocean drew a literal line from the canoe to the horizon. At noon, it was due north, and throughout the day the navigator could easily tell in which house that line was in. All of this applies south of the equator. When they traveled north of the equator, everything was reversed. The knowledge base was doubled. Obviously, this is a simplified overview, but it effectively tells us two things. One, that the star compass was extremely accurate. rivaling the real compasses used by later European sailors. And 2, that it required an immense amount of mentoring and experience. Pick any random Polynesian navigator, they could easily rival today's top celestial navigation experts. Ocean swell patterns. So important was celestial navigation that analysis of ocean swell patterns was a supplemental method, which any good navigator kept on top of constantly, assuming that some storm might obscure the sky unexpectedly at any time. Swells, as opposed to waves, are the deep, consistent wave systems generated by consistent trade winds or distant storms, and could be relied upon to maintain both their direction and their period for days or weeks at a time. Their consistency comes from the fact that their primary cause is the equally consistent trade winds. Navigators noted what directional house the swells were in, and could recalibrate that every time celestial bodies were visible. Swells can also come from distant storms, and swells in different directions are additive. There are nearly always multiple swell patterns going on at any given time. The prevailing swell is usually obvious to the eye, but to the Polynesian navigator, more data was needed. The traditional way that they sensed multiple swells, including patterns too subtle to see, was to sit or lie in the very bottom of the canoe in direct contact with the hull, allowing the body to sense every movement. Experienced navigators are said to have been able to detect as many as 5 different swell patterns at once. Wave and current analysis. Waves, as distinguished from swells, are smaller and more localized. They told a powerful story about nearby islands that might be obscured by dark or low visibility. Islands at sea influence wave patterns primarily through 2 processes, reflection and refraction, effects that in some cases can be detected as far as 50 kilometers away. Wave reflection occurs when waves strike the island and bounce back, though the details depend on shoreline shape and energy absorption. Refraction is subtler. As waves pass near the island, they slow in shallower water and bend, altering their direction beyond the island. The result is interference in surrounding wave patterns, guided by the same physical rules, yet uniquely shaped by each island's size, form, bathymetry, and geology. These changes, relative to the wave's normal, uninterrupted directions, were evident by the way they'd change from house to house. This could tell the navigator which direction the island was in, and how far away it was. And since every island changed wave patterns differently, in many cases they could even identify the island. Marshall Islanders developed the most sophisticated such system, creating stick charts made of palm frond ribs and shells. These were teaching tools that represented wave patterns around specific islands. Atmospheric and cloud phenomena. Clouds take distinctive forms above different kinds of islands. For example, mountainous islands create thermal updrafts that produce tall cumulus clouds, allowing many islands to be spotted from far away even while they're still below the horizon. All islands present warmer surfaces than the open ocean during daylight hours, resulting in localized weather patterns above them. Clouds can also help the navigator in other ways. In the right conditions, clouds can reflect the color of the water below. When there's a broad patch of light turquoise water in a shallow lagoon, this can sometimes lend a subtle hue to clouds above it, just as nighttime clouds above a city can reflect the prevailing color of streetlights over various parts of the city. Birds. Birds turn out to be the island hunter's best friends. The white tern, in particular, came in handy. White terns would fly far out to sea in search of fish each morning, sometimes as much as 200 kilometers. Then, in the evening, they would fly straight back. So if a navigator was lucky enough to spot a white tern, the bird provided a heading either directly from or toward an island, depending on the time of day. Brown terns also provided a similar service, only closer to the island. They made similar ventures, out in the morning, back in the evening, but generally stayed within about 60 kilometers of land. Sometimes white terns were carried aboard in cages and could be released if the navigator suspected they were near land. They would fly up, often circle for a short time, and then beeline straight for the nearest island. Marine life and debris indicators. Fish and flotsam were more than just things in the sea. They were indicators of how far from land you were. The Polynesians understood that certain fish species preferred certain depths of water, certain water temperatures, and distances from land. If coastal fish were spotted, it meant you couldn't be too far from reefs or lagoons. When deep water species appeared, it meant you were still out in the open ocean. Marine animal behavior was also a clue. Dolphins and porpoises often frequent certain places around islands, and during migratory seasons, whales would provide directional references. Floating vegetable matter helped navigators in at least two ways. First, its condition. If it was fresher, it meant you had to be pretty close to land. If it was more degraded and weathered, you could still be quite far away. Second was its type. Driftwood, leaves, coconut husk, and seaweed all indicated different types of island vegetation, giving an early identifier to which type of island, or which specific island, you were approaching. If the water was more cloudy or had a brown hue, that meant river runoff again, indicating type or identification of a nearby island. Wind pattern analysis. Understanding the wind patterns of the Pacific Ocean was not so much a part of navigating during a voyage, but of planning in advance. Over the centuries, the Polynesians came to understand these patterns very well. Northeast trade winds above the equator, southeast trade winds below. Captain Cook found that their knowledge was so complete that they knew to wait for the summer monsoons, when these patterns all changed rather drastically, to make trips northward from New Zealand to Fiji, or from Samoa to the Society Islands, journeys that would otherwise be both difficult and inefficient if attempted during the rest of the year. And finally, dead reckoning. The master navigator held in their head an extensive database of as many islands as each had ever visited or been taught about. They commonly knew the relative positions of over 100 islands. Distances between them was tracked in canoe days. The route from one island to the next was often established as a dog-legged path going in one direction for so many canoe days, often trying to arrive at a point directly upwind from the destination, which would be another known number of canoe days ahead. Tracking progress against these measurements was done with dead reckoning. Often mischaracterized as an experience-driven hunch or gut feeling about how far you've come, dead reckoning is actually a calculation. It's a relatively simple time-speed-distance calculation. The Polynesians did understand mathematics, mainly driven by the needs of wayfinding. They had no system of writing, and so they used what we term ethnomathematics, like measuring the height of a star with your thumb, using whatever the local geography and culture provides. Polynesian navigators knew how long they'd been traveling. They were both excellent judges of their speed through the water and were able to measure it against waypoints like islands or changes in wave patterns. And they knew the canoe day distances. They were, in fact, calculating, ethnomathematically. And every last bit of this skill set, from knowing the relative positions and spacing in canoe days of 100 different islands, to learning all the wind patterns at all the times of the year throughout all the latitudes of the Polynesian Triangle, to clouds and birds and marine life, to how the interaction of waves with islands will look 100 kilometers away, to learning the ways different swells feel against your body through the hull of a canoe, to memorizing in which house would 220 different stars rise and set in every season, had to be taught and passed down from generation to generation, without any system of writing. Navigators were apprentices for decades. Every one of them who ever voyaged developed an amount of knowledge that would put any modern PhD program to shame. And so we conclude our two-part series on ancient Polynesian navigation. It was an art, it was a craft, and it was a science. And it is being brought back to life by groups such as the Polynesian Voyaging Society throughout the Pacific, and by the master navigators there who train the next generation to ensure that this incredible, amazing, intricate, elegant, and wonderful skill, responsible for so much history and for populating such a huge geographical chunk of our beautiful blue planet, will always find its way home. We continue with more on Captain Cook's admiration of the Polynesian navigators in the ad-free and extended premium feed. To access it, become a supporter at skeptoid.com/go-premium. A great big Skeptoid shout-out to our premium supporters, including Nathan Branch, Cathandus, Kat Petrie, and Riley's dad in Patterson, California. Want a shout-out? Just visit the members portal at skeptoid.com/members and click on Shout-outs and Stories to tell me what you want me to say. As always, I do have upcoming appearances where we can hang out in person. Chief among these are the Skeptoid Adventures. Whether we're here local someplace or in some exotic destination around the world, I'd love to meet you and journey to adventure with you. Check out what's coming up at skeptoid.com/adventures. That's skeptoid.com/adventures. Are you getting the Skeptoid Podcast Companion email? It comes out each week along with each new episode, featuring the Wonder of the Week, show notes, and much more. If you don't, you're only getting half the show, so come to skeptoid.com and click on Podcast Companion Email. Skeptoid is a production of Skeptoid Media. Director of Operations and Tinfoil Hat Counter is Kathy Reitmeyer. Marketing Guru and Illuminati Liaison is Jake Young. Production Management and All Things Audio by Will McCandless. Music is by Lee Sanders. Researched and written by me, Brian Dunning. Listen to Skeptoid for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or iHeart. You're listening to Skeptoid, a listener-supported program. I'm Brian Dunning from Skeptoid.com.